we cross over. Comrade, make we cross over. My soul, shout out for power. My soul, shout out for power. My soul, shout out for power when we cross over.
All right, so viewers, Comrade Julian Robinson, as you know, is the opposition spokesperson on finance and also the MP of Southeast St. Andrew. So, Comrade, you know, it's so ironic that right before we started here, I actually saw something on the news. Nationwide posted a story about the finance minister claiming that there is danger raising the income tax threshold too high. A little bit before I came on live. You saw the story?
I didn't see it. I think what it was, there was a forum put on by Capri on Thursday, I think it may have been, with a discussion with Damian King. And I think Damian King and Capri have been recommending moving it to 2.5. And I think the minister indicated that they didn't want to go so far. So I think his point was few people, the higher you go, there are fewer people who would benefit. I think that was the answer he gave. The reason Capri had recommended it is that they are trying to get people back to the same purchasing power that they would have had in 2016 when we moved to 1.5. So they have worked out what inflation has been from 2016 to now. So to put you back in the same position you were in 2016, you would need to raise the threshold to 2.5. So that is the caveat. And our party leader has indicated that we want to go further. And just to say what we are recommending, we plan to implement it over in a 3-phase approach, meaning we wouldn't attempt to move to 3 million in one go, because that would be a very large, the revenue give up would be significant. So we would implement it over 3 years in a phase basis to get to the 3 million.
Comrade Julian, they're saying you're a little bit low. Is there any way you can turn up the volume on your device?
Right, let me turn up my volume. Yeah, sorry.
All right, thank you.
Is that better? And I'll move a little closer to the computer. Yeah.
Comrades, let me know if he's sounding any better.
Is that any better now?
You sound better to me. Okay, yes, they're saying that you sound better. All okay, right, you know, this whole thing surprises and amuses me, because initially when they started this this increase in the threshold, we were the ones who were cautioning them, and they were very bold about it. As a matter of fact, they went as far as to say that they were going to get it eventually to about 3 million. Isn't that right?
Well, all right, I think we need to go back. When they did it, what they said at the time is that they could do it without imposing any new taxes. And that is why, so when this was on the eve of the 2016 election, and we said it's not possible to do it without imposing new taxes. And we were correct. The then government, the JP government, to implement the 1.5, they imposed $32 billion of taxes. Most of those taxes were what we call indirect taxes. So they were consumption taxes. So you don't necessarily see it upfront, but when you go to the supermarket, you're paying more. So to implement the 1.5, they imposed $32 billion worth of new taxes, when their campaign promise was they would do it without any new taxes, which is why we cautioned them against that. And we said it wasn't possible to do it without new taxes.
But they're sticking to this no new taxes thing, which is really a 3-card trick, because as you say, what they've done is increase the consumption taxes. And as we have seen with the SCT on fuel, that basically drives up inflation everywhere.
So no new taxes means that they have not imposed new tax measures. So let me make the distinction. So there have been no new tax measures. However, as the price of certain items go up, you pay more taxes. So for example, if you take fuel, there's what they call an ad valorem tax. And the higher the cost of fuel goes, the higher the ad valorem tax. So even though it's not a new tax measure, you pay more. Similarly, generally with the cost of goods, inflation contributes to increase in tax revenues because as the cost of goods and services go up, taxes are a percentage of that. So if it is 15% and the cost of whatever, let's say a bag goes up, then you pay more in GCT. So, just to be clear, no new tax measures is different from not collecting new taxes. And what we have seen over the last 2 or 3 years is that our tax revenues have been growing significantly. Some of it, yes, it's general economic growth, but I would say inflation has also played a role in that. So more and more of the population, they're paying more taxes based on the price of goods and services, even though no new tax measures have been implemented.
So you would say then that this ad valorem tax now basically puts inflation out of control, which is why they've not been able to stay within their targets.
Well, all right. Well, the reason I would say they haven't been able to stay within their targets, I would say the majority of our inflation in Jamaica is what I would call imported inflation. So let's take the price of oil. We import oil. We produce very little in terms of renewable energies, which I want to get to at some point in the conversation. But you need oil for electricity, you need it for transportation. Now, we have no control over the price of oil. So, for example, the conflict in the Middle East between Israel and Palestine, Ukraine, Russia, those things impact the price of oil. Now, when the price of oil goes up, it has a knock-on effect on everything else. Because if electricity goes up, if you are, let's say, a producer of bread, as an example, if electricity go up, you have to increase the cost of the bread that you sell to people. If the cost of fuel goes up and you're delivering goods, then your costs have gone up. You have to pass it on. So a significant part of the inflation, I would say, is driven by external factors. But there's no question that the way our tax system is set up, particularly for gas, and particularly it's important to understand the ad valorem. The ad valorem, there was a hedge tax put in, primarily to put in a hedge, which is like an insurance. So depending on how high the price of oil goes, that would chip in, which would help to reduce the price to the end user. That tax has remained, but the government has not put in a hedge. So while you're paying more in taxes as you consume gas at the pump, etc., you are not getting the benefit of what that hedge would be. Tell me if you're following me or not.
I am following you. I'm following you, and the listeners are following you as well. I am following you. Right. So basically, he has put himself in a conundrum. Basically, that's what I understand from all you're saying. He's basically put himself in a conundrum now because of the taxes causing increase in everything, and now he can't control inflation because, as you said, the hedge was to reduce the cost of fuel to us. So because there is no hedge, he can't control the cost of the fuel, therefore he can't control inflation because the cost of fuel drives up inflation, right?
It does, but let me again. So inflation is really the purview. Controlling inflation is primarily the purview of the Bank of Jamaica. And what the Bank of Jamaica has been doing is to use interest rates as their main tool to bring inflation down, which is really what most central banks across the world have been doing. Now, the theory behind it is that you increase interest rates So let's say you are a typical consumer. It encourages you to save money because rates at the bank would go up. So let's say instead of buying that new car that you are going to buy, you put the money in the bank, you reduce your demand for the car. If you reduce the demand for the car dealer would be spending less foreign exchange to import the car, and then that reduces the demand, and that brings the general price of goods and services down. That's the theory, right? In Jamaica, it doesn't quite work that way because the inflation we have experienced, unlike developed countries like the US, is you have two types of inflation. You have demand pull and you have cost push. So demand pull would be, let's say somebody has come out with a new iPhone, and I'll just use an example. And the price of the iPhone, the person came to you and said, I'm going to sell you the iPhone for $100. But then 10 people come to him and say, I want to buy the same iPhone. So the demand for the iPhone has gone up. So the man selling the iPhone said, no, I'm not going to sell it for $100. I'm going to sell it for $150. That is what you call demand pull inflation, where there is a lot of demand for the price of goods, and the price goes up. That's not the problem we have in Jamaica. We have cost push inflation because most of what we consume, a significant part of what we consume, is imported. Fuel is a big part of the inflation basket. But if you look, for example, at any of the goods you go to the supermarket to buy, there's a heavy imported in component, even if it is manufactured here in Jamaica. So we have been suffering more from cost push inflation, which I don't necessarily believe raising interest rates solve that problem. So, part of where we are right now, in my view, where you're seeing a fall off in revenues and where the revenue intake for the last financial year was down, in my view, is attributed to the fact that interest rates are having a negative impact on the bottom line of companies. So again, if you take an example, your company A, you took out a loan from the bank 5 years ago. The interest rate at the time may have been 3 or 4%. It has moved 8% in the last 12 to 18 months. Now, some of that cost that you have absorbed, you can pass on to your end customer. Some of it you can't. And I believe part of the reason why those companies have reported lower profits and as such lower taxes is that the impact of the increase in interest rates is having a negative impact on general activity and profits for many of the companies.
But with me? Yes, I'm with you, because this is exactly what Keith Duncan from EPOC said. However,
yes, absolutely.
But Nigel Clark is saying that nothing don't go so is because the businesses they've not collected all the taxes from the businesses, and this is what now 6-7 weeks after the tax period has closed. So really, does he expect to collect much more to make up back for that shortfall?
I mean, my own view is, even if that is a partial explanation, I don't think it can be a full explanation. Because the reality is that the majority of the companies, they file and they pay by March 31st, because if you don't pay, you're penalized. I mean, once you have passed the deadline, THA imposes a penalty on you. So the majority of them file and pay. So even if some haven't paid, I don't think that can account for the 22 billion in the reduction in revenues that have happened. I think there are other more fundamental reasons. And to me, as Keith explained, and he would know, he runs a financial services company, the impact of increased interest rates. The BOJ moved interest rates from 0.5% to 7% in 18 months. So banks, as a result, would then increase the interest rates that they charge to people who want to buy a car or mortgages or businesses that borrow money. And again, you can only pass on so much of that cost to the end user. Some of it you have to absorb, and if you have to absorb it, that means your profits are going to be lower. And that's why I believe what you're seeing is a cause for concern, because I don't think next month, miraculously, we're going to see our revenues jumping back up. No, we're going to see more pressures on companies, and they're going to have to absorb some more of those costs, which means that is less tax revenues for the government.
All right, so now that we're talking about the tax revenue issue now, I wanted to explain to the listeners. A lot of people have been asking me what are the implications of these revenue shortfalls, because I was explaining to them last night that whereas when you're with the IMF test, the IMF test is like an international exam. This revenue shortfall thing is like a local exam, like the PEP. You have to pass this because you have to know where the money come from, because as Keith Duncan said, basically, or somebody sent me something, basically there are implications from this. So I want you to explain to the listeners now, what are the implications for the revenue shortfall?
So the best way, just use a personal example, use your own example as an individual. So you may, let's say you work at a company and you earn $1 million, and then your side business gives you another $2 million. So your income is, you project to earn $3 million. Based on what you project to earn, you plan your expenditure. You have to buy food, you pay your bills, you may want to take a trip with your family, whatever, pay your school fees, whatever. You then find out that the side business, instead of bringing in the 2 million, is only bringing in 1.5 million this year, because you may have lost a customer, or your people are not paying you, or whatever. It therefore means that you had planned to spend the 3 million based on what you projected to bring in, but you only have brought in 2.5. Now you have two options as an individual. You could go and borrow money at the bank to spend to make up for the deficit. And in the case of the government could impose new taxes to make up for the deficit. But they have said so far they don't plan to do that. So the obvious implication, if your revenues are down, is that you have to look to cut your expenditures, because your revenues need to be in line with your expenditures. So given that you had a shortfall of 22 billion, unless by some miraculous means you make it up, let's say in the next month or two, you're going to now have to adjust your expenditures, which means there are programs you have to look at. Now, Keith Duncan said they may have to look at Spark, or they may have to look at this reverse income tax. I don't know which programs they'll have to look at, but you will have to cut programs to suit the revenues that you're bringing in. It's as simple as that. If you don't do that, then you have to raise taxes, and they said they don't plan to raise taxes. And that is what Keith has said. That's what, and I mean, that's just the normal rational thing that an individual would have to do. And it's the same thing that a government would have to do.
And hence the conundrum they found themselves in. Now, explain, the Spark program that's the new program that they came up with to allocate resources to fixing road and infrastructure.
Roads and stuff, yeah. So, I mean, my own view, just me personally, I don't think Spark is going to be cut, because frankly, of all the other expenditures, I think, we have an election due next year, September, and I think they're going to do everything to ring fence and protect Spark, because, Spark is putting money on the ground. They have 49 MPs. They're going to want to, spend money on roadworks. So my own view is that they probably will have to look at other expenditures that they will have to cut. But so Spark is designed for MPs, councillors to undertake roadworks in your constituency, to deal with many of the interior roads, which tend to be neglected, and which, frankly, the normal resources you have through a constituency development fund simply can't address it. So we don't have an issue with, and I don't think any MP or council would tell you they have an issue with the allocations for Spark, no, because our own constituents have been crying out for improvements in their roads. But at some point, as I said, whether it is Spark or something else, they will have to make adjustments if the revenues are not there.
a listener is saying that the Spark program is basically Jeep reinvented.
I agree. I mean, they call it something else, but that's in essence what it is. I mean, at the time, we had allocated, I believe the figure in 2012 was about 40 million per constituency. And there was a secretariat, you would identify the projects, mainly roads, sidewalks, etc., drains.